Hello, everyone. I'm Sarina Fazan, and welcome to my podcast, Trailblazer, where you hear from the most remarkable people that I certainly have met. And one of them is sitting across from me right now. In fact, I got so nervous, I had to do my opening again, and it's Mike Deeson. I know you know that name. He is, I would say, one of the best, if not the best, investigative journalists in the country.
Oh, that's so kind.
Mike, you should have been on network news, but you chose not to be on network news because you stayed in Tampa, Florida.
That's right. You know, all my friends, I have a lot of friends that ended up in network news. It's a very tough life. They travel an awful lot. I like to travel, but they never know where they're going to be. Kerry Sanders with NBC is a real good friend of mine, and he told me one year he had spent 255 nights in motel rooms.
You are kidding.
Yeah, it was an incredible year for him traveling, and that was not the lifestyle I wanted. And particularly as an investigative reporter, I wanted to get into the innards of a community, and hopefully, I always thought of myself as the sand in the oyster that makes a pearl. By being an irritant, hopefully, I made the community better. And
you have.
And that's why I chose not to even try to pursue that. But who knows if they would have hired me or not? But
I know they would have.
But I that was not the lifestyle that I wanted. And the other thing is, I have a lot of friends who work for the network, and I say, well, what kind of feedback do you get? And they said, the only time I hear from the network is when they're unhappy. Now, they never say, oh, great job and all that. Only when so it just wasn't the type of thing I wanted to do.
Well, you know, I jumped right into it and just talked about you and said how great you are, which you are. But give us a little bit of a background for people who are just listening in or people who may not be from our area. You've won, like 14 Emmys?
12. Hopefully.
12.
Maybe more coming.
Oh, yeah. There's more. You've been in the business for more than 50 years.
I have.
And you've changed laws as well.
Yeah, I've been able to do that, to accomplish some things. I've been able to send some folks to prison, have had elected officials fired or lose elections because of our stories, and that's always satisfying when someone's doing something wrong. You point it out, and then all of a sudden things change because of that, and then that's always thrilling.
Mike, did you always want to be a journalist? Like, what happened? Take me through your career.
Yeah, I really did. The only two things I really wanted to do in life was either pitch for the Cubs. I played baseball in high school, but I was, like most left-handed people, extremely wild. Had a great fastball, really wild, and so it made me not qualified for baseball, but maybe very qualified for broadcasting, being wild like that. And actually, I started out in sports because I figured, okay, if I can't play ball, I'll be associated with it. But I am so old that when I graduated from the University of Missouri, one of the finest journalism schools in the country, that there were only 16 Major League Baseball teams. There were 14 NFL teams. There were 6 hockey teams, and only 3 stations in each city. There wasn't cable. There weren't all the outlets. So for a sports job, it was really limited. And although I did some sports, I said, I really like news too. And so I switched from sports into news.
Did you know you wanted to go into investigative journalism from the get-go?
I thought so. What really pushed me over the edge, I worked in Norfolk, Virginia for 10 years before I came here. And I started out doing political reporting. And politics is associated with investigative because you see people doing things they shouldn't be doing. And I got the most satisfaction exposing politicians who were lying. So once I started doing that, I went, oh, man, if I could do this the rest of my life, I would be a happy camper. And that's basically how it turned out.
So I want to go back. I want to go forward with your career. But when talking about the politicians, when you said you got that satisfied feeling, was it because it was always like good versus evil, for lack of a better term, or correcting, as you mentioned, correcting a wrong?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in playing by the rules. And I just didn't like people who thought they were better than other people because either they were wealthy or they had some position of power, and then people who take advantage of it. I mean, my theory is that the elected officials work for us. They're not better than we are. They're our employees.
Right.
And if they lie to me, like with any employee, you got to fire them. So I thought it was my job to let the employers, the public, know what their employees are doing, and if they're doing something wrong, I want people to know about it. So that was my satisfaction. If you're going to play by, you got to play by the rules. So I liked exposing people who didn't.
And you've worked in multiple markets, but you have worked in Tampa clearly the longest.
The longest, right?
So tell us too. You've interviewed presidents. You've watched executions. Can you just go through?
I'll give you a couple of stories. Okay.
Okay.
Let me give you 3 president stories.
Okay.
One is with Ronald Reagan. Back when I first came to Tampa, when a president would come to town, all the stations would do a live cut-in when the president landed. And whenever the president went to, usually there was a speech, we would cover it live.
Yes.
And then when he left, we would come back live. Well, Reagan comes to town, and my assignment that day was the Clearwater St. Pete Airport, where Air Force One lands. And sometimes, this is way before 9/11, obviously, security wasn't always that tight around presidential visits. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. Well, Reagan comes, goes off in the entourage, and they let us wander around the tarmac right in front of Air Force One.
Isn't that amazing? Because people do not realize, I know after 9/11, so much changed.
So much change, right. So I go to a Secret Service agent who is standing at the bottom of the stairs, because they came down a stairwell thing, and I said to him, let me ask you a question. And the Secret Service agent looks at me, he goes, stop, I have a question for you. And I went, what? He said, do you personally know God? And I went, what? He said, do you personally know God? I said, well, I mean, I have I'm a religious. I said, well, he said, well, if you don't personally know God, then the answer is no. And I said, the answer is no. He said, yeah, you were going to ask me, what are the odds of you going up the stairwell, sticking your head inside of Air Force One? I said, well, as a matter of fact, I was. He said, I have been on this detail for 6 months. This is the closest I have been to inside the airplane.
Wow.
And unless you personally know God, you don't get inside the airplane. So wasn't that goofy?
Yes.
Okay. Second one, George H. Bush, Papa Bush. I spent 4 months in Homestead after Hurricane Andrew. The devastation was unbelievable. Bill Clinton was running against Papa Bush at the time. Clinton had visited Homestead in South Florida several times, and there were signs on the roof, President Bush, where are you? Where are you? Well, finally, politically, it was necessary for him to come to Homestead. I was off someplace else. I got a beep because we had limited cell phones back then, only in the trucks.
And we had beepers.
And beepers. And they said, get to this strip shopping center that had been devastated where Bush was. So we drove there. By the time we got there, there was a gaggle of reporters. We couldn't get anywhere near him. And I said to the photographer, Gene Yeagle, who's one of the best in the business and a good friend, I said, Gene, we're never going to get close to him. If we stand right here, if he, by some chance, turns our way, I think I can stick a microphone in his face before the Secret Service tackles me.
I am mesmerized.
So
what happened?
So I said, and if he turns the other way, we'll get it off the network. Well, sure enough, he turns our way. And I go up to him and I go, Mr. President, and all the other guys freaked, but he wanted the publicity.
Right.
And I said, well, this is terrible, isn't it? And he talked, so we walked and talked together. Now, what people have to understand, local reporters don't usually get an exclusive walking and talking interview with the current sitting president of the United States.
Yes.
So
it's very, very rare. It never happens.
It never happens. Yeah. So anyway, I'm talking to him. We're about 4 or 5 questions. We're walking and talking, and then I feel this big hand on my shoulder that goes, that's enough. It was a Secret Service agent. And I went, thank you, Mr. President. And he walked away. I mean, that was pretty cool.
That is amazing.
That was a fun story. Okay, the other one involves Bill Clinton. This is after he's no longer the president. He was campaigning for Bill McBride, who ran against Jeb in Jeb's second term, and he ran a terrible campaign.
He's one of the most charismatic men I have ever met. Wouldn't you agree with Bill Clinton?
Oh, yeah.
He has some type of presence about him.
Absolutely. That's what this story's all about. Well, first off, we were flying around the state in small airplanes as they're doing the appearances everywhere. And I don't remember where it was, but I think it was West Palm. But
what type of plane were you flying? I mean, not what type of plane. Were you? I guess what I'm asking, were you flying with the political entourage? Or
yeah,
the
political.
So
yeah,
you were with
small,
the political
small.
entourage.
Yeah, we had to pay for it, I think. But whatever. There was about, I don't know, 10 media folks or something like that. So we land in West Palm, and the first thing I do when I get off a small airplane is go to the bathroom. Go to the bathroom, of course. Well, it's true.
Okay, right.
So, there's
Right.
small planes. There's no bathroom there. So I go to the bathroom, and as I go to push the door open, Bill Clinton opens it up.
No
Yeah.
way.
So I go, Mr. President. And he goes, come right in. There's plenty of room.
Oh my God.
So anyhow, then he does the thing, and then we did a thing in it's I don't know, someplace in Miami, and then we had to go to South Beach. Well, we got the political entourage. I mean, the what do you call it? The caravan with the police. They stopped the traffic and all that stuff, and we get to South Beach, and we stop in front of a Starbucks. And I'm going, Starbucks, this can't be where the speech is. So I get off the press bus, and I look, what's going on? And Clinton goes, well, we got here a little early. I thought I'd buy the traveling media some coffee. So the Secret Service storms the Starbucks, scares the hell out of everybody inside. We go in. I was first up, and Clinton goes, what do you want? I said, just regular coffee. Gives me coffee. He said, cream and sugar in the back. I said, no, I drink it black. So now we go outside, and we're standing in a circle. And it is Clinton to my left, me, Bill Nelson, who was the
Of course, the U.S. Senator.
Another reporter, Gene Yeagle, the photographer I was working with again on that story, another photographer, Chris Tucker, the actor, who had become a very good friend of Clinton, who's traveling with him. And as a matter of fact, Clinton said, we just got back from a tour of Africa, and I realized I was no longer president when the crowd kept saying, who's that gray-haired guy with Chris Tucker?
Oh, my God. He has quite a sense of humor.
So anyway, I started playing reporter like I always do and started asking him questions. He goes, you know all about me. I want to know about you. He said, how long you been in the business? What have you done? Blah, blah, blah. He asked all these questions. And then we go around the circle, and he asks people all the questions. It has been at least 15 minutes since I've said a word to him. And he turns to me and says, Mike, remembers my name, says, Mike, I have a question about something you said earlier. I want a clarification, which meant he was listening to me.
That gives me goosebumps.
It was the best life lesson that I ever got. I thought, if Bill Clinton can pay attention to what I'm saying, then shame on me if I ever meet someone and don't pay attention to what they're saying and don't remember their name. It was
a
life lesson from Bill Clinton. So those are I've got a bunch of other, but those are my three favorite
presidential
stories. Let me tell you something about executions. I won't get into all the macabre stuff. And I saw electric chair and a lethal injection.
I tell you, though, it changed me after I witnessed an execution.
You know,
yes. It didn't change you?
No. Honestly, I always found it harder to be at the crime scene where an unsuspecting relative drives up and sees the tape, and then the police officer has to explain that their loved one has been murdered, or to be in the court. You know, okay, here's a spoiler alert. We are all going to die. And while murder is a horrible way, they die once. The family dies every single day.
It's so hard.
So being in the courtroom and all that, for everybody that I saw executed, there was no question that they had committed the murders, and it just didn't faze me the same way. But maybe you'll remember this. After every execution, the physician nods, yes, he's been executed.
Yes.
A bailiff comes there on the other side of the glass, where's the execution chamber, and he goes, the state has carried out his sentence against Gerald Eugene Stanton, blah, blah, blah. Please exit to the left. Like it's a Disney thing. Go into the souvenir shop, and there's another group coming in. So, but that never, that really, I know maybe I'm hard-hearted.
No, you're not. I mean, you bring up a very good point, because, I want to clarify, too, for people who are listening, it's all, to me, I guess, all of it is disturbing. You're right. The rolling up on those crime scenes, witnessing that unsuspecting relative finding out for the first time, the courtroom, yes, but the first time, I have to say that I witnessed it, it was just, I wouldn't want to do it again. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah. Was it a lethal or an electric chair?
It was lethal. It was not electric chair.
Electric chair was pretty macabre. I've got to admit, that was pretty macabre. But yeah, it's part of our society. Yeah.
But I interrupted your story because you said that you said you weren't going to get into too much about the executions, but there was one story you wanted
No,
to tell
it was
us.
about the exit to the left.
Oh, about the exit to the left.
No,
Right.
it's just
So, Mike, I know you have done, oh my gosh, you can't even count how many stories you've done. You can't even count how many
Thousands.
people you've met. But are there any particular ones? Oh, how about this one? Is there any one that you are extremely proud of? I know you're proud of many, but is there any one that sticks out?
Well, there's a couple that come to mind real quickly. One I did, I don't know, a couple of years ago about Tampa Fire captain
Mm-hmm.
who also was the treasurer for a charity that dealt with orphans, and he embezzled $400,000 from the orphans.
Heartbreaking. And we have to mention too that you have children and now even grandchildren.
Right.
So children clearly, when children are the victims,
It really bugged me. Well, the day after he was convicted and sentenced to federal prison, the assistant U.S. attorney turned to me and said, "You know, if it wasn't for your story, we wouldn't be here today." And
oh my gosh.
I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, my boss. What happened was my boss saw your story. We had a staff meeting the next day, and he said, 'What are we doing about this?' And he said, we all looked around and went, and he said, 'Get the FBI on this case and get him.' And they did." And what I was really cool, because you know the U.S. Attorney's Office does not talk very often.
Not at all.
I said, "Could you say that on camera?" And he said, "I'll call my boss." And he said, "My boss is so appreciative, I can say it." So they said it on camera. So that was one that really stuck with me.
And and that's the whole reason why, like, people like you and I think became journalists in the
Absolutely.
first place, to make a difference and to do something.
Right. The other thing that really stands out was I did a series of stories about the former airport director, Lewis Miller, who was like a character in a Shakespearean tragedy. His biggest strength was his biggest weakness. He put together a wonderful, wonderful airport, and a lot of credit goes to Lewis. However, because he was so good at running the airport, he thought he could do anything, that the board worked for him instead of him working for the board. And he set about to destroy a building. It used to be the Continental Reservation Center off of Boy Scout Road. And he didn't tell the board. And they were starting to demolish it.
He didn't tell the board?
He didn't tell the board, no. And he was forced out. He would have been fired had it not been for it. And then he also said, when our story started coming up, that, well, there was nobody interested in that building, the blah, blah, blah. Well, that was a lie. Moffett was interested in the building. They stopped the destruction of it, and that building today is the Moffett Cancer Center that's right off of Boy Scout Road.
Mike, that gives me goosebumps right now.
So,
oh, my gosh.
So had it not been for our stories, that building would not be there anymore, and Moffett would not be there in South Tampa.
That's amazing.
So let me tell you a funny story about someone that I did a bunch of stories about. Remember Kevin White, county commissioner?
Yes, of course.
Well,
he wrote to me from prison, by the way, too.
Well, wait. I got a better one. I got a better one. So, and he wrote to me as well.
Of
Kevin
course,
loved
because,
me.
Tell them.
Well, Kevin did. Kevin and I got along. Kevin did all these crazy things. Like the first week he was on city council. He was on city council before that. He made a motion for a raise. I said, "Kevin, you ran for blah blah blah." Then he used his campaign money next time to buy suits. And I did that story. And he met me at the tailor shop. Kevin loved me.
And you did the exclusive interview of when he was
getting ready to go.
Yes. Getting ready to go to prison.
So anyway,
federal prison.
It's a Sunday morning. I'm playing golf at Heritage Harbor on Lutz Lake Fern Road, and my phone rings. And I don't usually answer it unless it's my wife, my kids, grandkids, whatever. But there's a 404 area code, and I go, maybe I better answer this. So I answer it, and I hear, "Mike, this is Kevin." I go, "Kevin?" He goes, yeah, Kevin White. They smuggled a cell phone into the prison, and I'm hiding underneath a bunk.
Oh my gosh.
And I go, "Kevin, call your wife, call your kids." He said, "I already did that." But he said, "I want to know what's going on in Tampa, and you're the man who knows. Tell me what's going on."
Oh, my gosh.
So he's calling me from federal prison.
Aren't you glad that you answered that phone?
I am. So it was just crazy. But there was Kevin,
Calling you from underneath a
underneath
prison bunk.
a prison bunk. Yeah.
Oh my gosh! So you officially retired 2 years ago, but you really have not officially retired.
Yeah.
I want to hear about. So you've done multiple projects. You're doing a documentary right now, but you also wrote a book.
I wrote a book. I finally got the final chapter back from the editor a couple of weeks ago. We were in Ireland right before I left for Ireland. It's called "Bad News for You is Good News for Me." It's about my 50 years in broadcasting, and some of the stories that I've just told you are included in the book as well. The problem was, because I've been in the business so long, I had to stop. I had to cut out stories.
I was going to say
it was too long. I've got a whole. If this book is successful, I've got part 2 ready to go. I mean, I had the Kevin story.
Could be a whole story in itself.
Yeah, well, but
a
Kevin,
whole book in itself.
Kevin didn't make it into. I know. I had to cut that out.
Wow.
But I have chapters about every hurricane I've ever covered, all the presidents, the executions, the birthing of the Rays, the whole thing with the Bucks sale. It just goes on and on and on and on. And I had to stop. It was just too long.
When do you hope to get that into
publication? Sometime this fall, I hope.
That's so exciting.
So, but yeah, it's just, How
long did it take you to write?
What I did, I started when I was still at the station. I just started at night. A journey of 1,000 steps starts with the first. I just would write a little bit at home at night on my laptop. Like you, I'm a writer. I find writing easy.
I love it.
And so I just did it, and then it needed obviously a lot of editing first on my part, and then I sent it to an actual editor who even edited it more. It made it tighter. I mean, a problem with a lot of journalists, particularly TV journalists, is we go on and on and on and on.
We love it.
We love it, and then we have to compress what we did. I mean, same thing with TV. All my pieces went through editing, and legal. When I was at the TV station, when I would write a story, then it would go to our investigative unit producer. Sometimes she would write it with me, or he would write it because we had a couple. But usually I would write it. She'd look at it, make some changes. It'd go to our executive producer, who would look at it, make changes. Then either to the news director or the assistant news director. And then we would have a conference call with our Washington attorney, who would go line by line over the story, say, what documentation do you have to back that up? What do you have here? What do you have here? And that's why, although we were sued several times, because anybody can file a lawsuit, we never lost any of the lawsuits.
I know, because you're such an outstanding journalist. I know you're very humble, but you're an outstanding journalist.
Well, I'm a paperwork freak, and I try to back up everything that I say.
And so now you're working on an elephant documentary.
That's one of the projects I'm into. I'm very excited about this. I was hired by here. Let me explain. When I finished TV, I wanted to do documentaries. I always like long form, and I thought what I would do is try to do documentaries that I wanted to do and peddle them to see if I could sell them. That model never got off the ground because people started contacting me, asking me to do documentaries, and honestly, I have not advertised or solicited. They've all come to me. So a group came to me, an animal advocacy group. It's a nonprofit, 501c3, and they asked me to do a documentary about elephants being abused in small circuses and carnivals around the country. And I've been traveling the country doing that. It's heartbreaking. People think because Ringling went out of business that there's no more elephants in the circuses, which is just not true. They are kept. First of all, they're trained very cruelly. An elephant by nature does not stand on its head. And honestly, they beat the hell out of elephants. And I've got undercover video. I didn't shoot it. I've done interviews with people who have shot it. And it's, even though I've seen it hundreds of times, it is very tough to watch. In fact, one of my challenges is to figure out, I've got to show it a little bit so people will know that this is happening. But they can't watch much because it's so horrendous.
It's so disturbing.
It is so disturbing. So anyway, I'm doing that, and hopefully it will make a difference. There is currently legislation that's been introduced that would prohibit circuses from moving animals across state lines. And I was in New Jersey. They passed a law there, a similar law, just in New Jersey, for the last circus where elephants were allowed to come in. I was with the legislator who sponsored it, the state senator and all. And that's what we're hoping that this documentary will do.
And this is certainly not your first documentary. You also did another one on alimony, correct?
Right.
Permanent alimony.
Florida is one of the few states in the country that still has lifetime alimony. and permanent alimony. So I was hired by a group to do that. Had some unbelievable horror stories. I had a woman whose ex-husband physically and mentally abused her, but physically abused her, police reports and all that. They get divorced. He doesn't work. She's a dentist. She was ordered to pay him $3,500 a month for the rest of her life.
That's
Her
awful.
abuser. She's paying her abuser $3,500 a month for the rest of her life. I had a doctor who was in it, who in 2009 got Alzheimer's. By 2011, he was less coherent than my 18-month-old grandson, and I've got video of that, and they wouldn't modify the alimony. He didn't have any source of income, and he paid alimony to his ex-wife till the day he died a year ago, August.
That is so sad. So can we see some changes, do you hope?
Well,
with
hopefully,
the
what happened...
documentary, it went to every lawmaker,
It went to
correct?
every lawmaker, and there was one committee chairman this year. There was a bill, and he wouldn't let it be heard in committee.
But I know you're not going to give up.
I'm not going to give up. No, I'm not going to give up on that. But that was an interesting one, and I've done a couple other documentaries. One about teaching kids to read through singing.
Oh.
And the school system is being reticent to use it for some unknown reason. But that was a pretty interesting documentary.
How long are your documentaries, Mike?
They vary. The one about alimony was like 30 minutes. The elephant documentary, which is called Broken, will be about an hour and a half.
When can we see that, do you think?
That's a good question. The deal is the group that hired me wants to submit it to the Sundance Film Festival. So the way Sundance works is they don't want it to be seen anyplace else until they show it. Now, just because they submit it doesn't mean it's going to be chosen. I mean, like 900 films get submitted to Sundance every year, and about 150 get chosen. I don't know. It would be a dream if they did it. So we're just starting to edit it right now. I might have a couple more interviews to do, but as you know, you can drop the interviews in everywhere. But I've got, I think I told you this the other day, 951 video files.
Yes.
I've been shooting a lot on that, but it's coming together. I'm real pleased with it.
Well, you're amazing. And, so we have to wrap up soon, but I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story now. So I had started in Tampa. I was, started out as a reporter here before I was promoted and to an anchor. And honestly, but anyway, okay, that's already being told. We were covering court. It was some court, and everybody's like, oh, there's Mike Deeson. And I'm like, wow. You're always so kind
They
to
said,
me.
who's that goofy guy?
No, like amazing. So I will never forget. So when we go live, right? So the cameras start rolling. It was like the 5 o'clock newscast or something, and we're all going live. It's the lead story. Everybody has their notepads. They have their notepads, and then there you are, no notepad at all. You read it. You're standing right next to me, so I see what I can hear what you're saying. And you go to the soundbite. I remember Eric Moore, who's a great photographer. He's the chief photographer at the ABC station. I looked at Eric and I said, I know that I would have made it when I can do what that guy does. Because that was, and then I introduced myself to you. You may not, but that, you inspired me so much. And the day that I did that I could just read something without a notepad and go right into the story. And we're not just talking about like a little intro into a piece, folks. We're talking about a court case. And then, and I remember asking you, I said, gosh, how did you do that? And you said, you have to know what you're talking about and everything will come to you.
That's true.
Life lesson for me, Mike Deeson.
Oh, I'm glad.
Life lesson for me.
Do you have one more second? I can tell you a story about Eric Moore.
Of course.
We used to call. I always called Eric Lobster Man.
Why Lobster Man? I love this guy, by the way. Again, he's our chief photographer at ABC.
Great guy. We were covering the NFL meetings in Palm Beach at the Breakers Hotel, and this was when the Bucs were threatening to move. So I did all the Bucs coverage, not the sports department, about the potential move and all that stuff. And at the NFL meetings, you're there, you're trying to get stuff all day, and then every network throws a party at night, and you're with the owners, and everything's sort of off limits to ask the owners and the other journalists and the network people. Well, ABC had a party, and they had unlimited lobster. and and so, like, I got a couple lobster tails and some salad and all. Eric must have had 15 lobsters and nothing else. Every time I saw him going back, I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "More lobster, man. More lobster."
Whoa. So you call him the lobster man. He is such a great guy.
He is a
He's
really
great
good guy,
guy.
and he loves lobster.
He loves we have learned that now. He loves lobster. And actually, before I let you go, what piece of advice would you give to journalists now?
Okay.
Like I think this is very because television is a whole new ball game right now.
Yeah, I still think the reason I was successful was maybe I wasn't the brightest or the best, but I vowed to outwork everybody. I got to the station early. I stayed at the station late. I worked at home. I met people face to face. There's nothing better than meeting a source face to face and talking to them even when you don't need something. There was a guy named Steve Cole who was the public information
Yes.
officer for the Tampa Police Department. And when I was downtown, I'd stop in and say, "How you doing? How's the family? Blah, blah," because he had been a reporter with me at one point. And he told me once, he said, "You and Bill McGinty, who is a friend of mine who works in North Carolina, are the only two people that come in to talk to me when you don't want something."
Isn't that something?
And he said to me, "So if I can give someone a break on a story, guess who's going to get that break?" But it's people. It's all about people. It's all about people and working hard. And that's what I always said I would do. I would outwork anybody, and I'd work my sources, and I try to treat people kindly.
Well, you're an inspiration to so many people, including myself.
Oh, thank you.
And I so appreciate you coming on the show.
This is great.
And I'm going to have you back.
Okay.
By the way. Okay. I think the next time about like being in a successful marriage, because
Okay.
I also have we also talk about dating occasionally on the show. I think you could give a lot of people some advice. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. You can find me on multiple social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Sarina Fazan News, or on YouTube, Suggestions by Sarina. But really the best way to find me is just go to my website at sarinafazan.media, and you will find links to everything. And in closing, paraphrasing one of my favorite poets of all time, Ralph Waldo Emerson, go where there is no path and leave a trail.